Welcome to episode 38 of the FoodGrads Podcast, the podcast where we explore careers in the food, beverage, and agricultural industries. I'm your host, Veronica Hislop, a molecular science graduate student and career partner with FoodGrads. This week on the podcast, I interviewed Jill Kersten, Senior Corporate Manager of Supply Chain Quality at Morton Salt Inc. The Morton Salt Company produces pantry salts for the kitchen, water softening salt for the home, ice melt solutions for the winter, and various other solutions to make consumer lives better. On this episode, Jill and I talked about quality and how it's managed throughout the supply chain, and how she helps to ensure that Morton Salt continues to produce high-quality salt. Jill told me about her unique pathway getting to where she is, starting with her engineering degree in manufacturing and working her way through different types of positions throughout her career. Before diving into that, though, Jill talked to me about how salt is manufactured and what they look for in high-quality salt. The science behind it is pretty cool, and I came out of this episode knowing a lot more about how salt is made. In addition to that, we talked about quality across the supply chain. Who's responsible for what do you look for, and how companies work together with suppliers to ensure that consumers stay safe at all parts of the chain. So if you are interested to learn more about careers in continuous improvement, food safety for more of that corporate level, or any of the things relating to Lean Six Sigma, then you don't want to miss this episode. So enough with that introduction. Let's get on to the show. Thank you, Jill, for taking the time to come on the show. I have been hearing what you do, at least your job title, a lot in the news recently. Well, more than that, but I definitely, it's been an area of the kind of food industry I've always been interested in because I feel as students, you're not really exposed to this type of work. And I saw your background. So I was so happy when you reached out, and thank you for coming on the show.
Great, thanks. I'm happy to be here, Veronica.
Yeah, so for those who might not know what I'm talking about, I saw the term supply chain in there, and I saw that you have like this engineering, there's some quality background, and I don't know much about any of this type of stuff, so I think it's going to be a good episode. So I'm going to let you talk about it first and get us started. So could you please tell me a little bit more about what you do as the senior manager? You know what? I'll let you take it away. Tell me what you do and where you work.
No problem. So I'm Jill Kersten, and my title is the Senior Manager of Supply Chain Quality, and I work at Morton Salt. I'm sure most people have heard of Morton Salt, but for the shout out for Canadian listeners, it's also Windsor Salt up there. Those are both of our brands that we produce under. And I think when people think of Morton Salt, the first thing that comes to mind is the salt that you can buy in the grocery store that everybody loves, particularly that kosher salt that we make. It's really much larger than people first think about. So not only do we make food grade salt, but we have about like 1,000 applications that salt can go into in all different industries. So whether it's food, agricultural products, pharmaceutical grade products, water softening, ice melt products, stuff that goes into oil and gas. So it's really a very varied company that I don't think we're probably very unique in that aspect of all the different industries that we serve. So it always makes things interesting in a day in the life at Morton Salt. But specifically my role within the company, I manage a team of quality professionals. We make sure we oversee the quality assurance and food safety risk managed throughout our supply chain. So when we talk about the supply chain, we're talking about areas like our raw material and packaging suppliers, our contract manufacturers, our storage and distribution partners, our transportation partners, auditing of our internal facilities, our external facilities, as well all the way to the other end of the supply chain, quality support to our customers.
Okay. Well, that is a lot. And I'm happy that you gave me the Canadian version because I'm the Canadian over here. And as soon as you said Windsor Salt, I was like, okay, now I know exactly because I'm very familiar with your products. You know, we don't think about all these different types of salts, but obviously salts, we just think of table salt. But as someone who's in chemistry, I know that there's many different kinds of salts. So it's interesting that a company is also able to cater to so many different types of things. You did mention about how you lead in terms of quality, and that actually leads me to my question about asking, what is a good quality salt? Because I feel like salt, we take it for granted in the sense that it's like a rock almost. And I would be curious to know about what do you look for in quality? I know it would differ between different types, but could you elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it might be helpful to talk about like how we get salt, like how it comes
Okay,
out of the ground of the ocean and
let's
gets
do
to
that.
somebody's table. There's about three different ways that you primarily can get salt that you're going to eat. The first and oldest method is mined salt. So a traditional mine, you've got like heavy water equipment that's digging underground, miles under the ground, and looking for those salt deposits and pulling salt out with heavy industrial equipment, essentially. The majority of your food salt is not going to come from that method, though. So there's a few exceptions, but typically when we're looking at the quality of that salt, there's a lot of impurities that are found like naturally occurring as those salt beds and salt formations found that are it's not fit for human consumption for the most part. There are a few exceptions in different salt deposits around the globe, but for the most part, when you just do this heavy equipment mining, it's going to go for more of our industrial applications. That's typically what's going to get thrown out on the road with your or on your sidewalks to de-ice. The next method that people are probably most familiar with is like sea salt or what we call solar salt as well. So that's where you're going to be harvesting naturally salinated water from oceans or seas. And it gets dried out, it gets collected in ponds and dried out using the sun. And then we, again, would dig that, we call it harvesting to get it in, and break it up into smaller crystal sizes to get it into the food that you're eating. And then the last one, which is what is the primary source for most or for all table salt and what you're the most of the products that you're going to see in like a grocery store is what we call vacuum evaporation. So that's really a solution mining. So it's access to similar like salt bed deposits as you would do with traditional mining. But this way, we are able to control the impurities significantly better because we're essentially pumping down hot water into a well, super salinating that water, and then pumping it back up above ground in vacuum pan evaporation of that salt. So you're really able to fine tune the salt, the crystal sizes in that manner. So, the salt, as with like any other ingredient or food that you're producing, we have the same food safety concerns that any other food company is going to have. So we're looking at, making sure that there's no foreign materials that are getting introduced into our processes. We're making sure that our sites are free of any like potential micro contaminations, for, like example from like a water source or incoming foot traffic, any typical source of like micro, and also making sure that we have like proper chemical controls on the site, that we're using the right types of lubricants, and making sure that we're restricting allergens from entering into our facilities. And then on the quality specific side, outside of food safety, you mentioned that there's lots of different types of salts and different levels of salt.
Yeah.
So some of the things that we're concerned about in like food particularly, like some of our big hitters is we're looking at controlling the impurity levels. So when we talk about salt and you know that it's like a rock and a crystal, when that crystal forms, things that aren't salt could get trapped inside of that salt crystal. The most common thing would be like a calcium deposit trapped within, or magnesium within that NaCl that we're looking for bond that's forming in that crystal. The other thing that we're looking for is controlling our moisture levels. So if you think about like if you have some salt in your hand and you drop some water drops into it, this would be an extreme example, but it'll start clumping together. And we want to make sure that our salt is always free flowing. And so we control the moisture levels to prevent the salt from clumping together. The other one, when you think of salt outside of like our colored salts, you want that nice white crystal that you're seeing. So we focus a lot on the color of the salt that we're getting. And then probably the biggest one is like controlling for our different particle sizes. So different applications of salts are going to require different size crystals, different crystal formations. So you can think about like what you would use for cooking in your kitchen. That's particle size of salt looks very different the next time you eat a pretzel. Take a look at the salt on your pretzel. It's going to look a lot different than what you see in your kitchen when you're pouring it out.
Wow, that is so cool. I mean, that I've never thought that deep into salt, even though I know I've seen like Himalayan salt, and I know that they're different, but one of the things that you mentioned that stood out to me that I never even considered was that having this salt could trap like other types of ions in it. And I don't know, I just find that really cool.
Yeah, we have a lot of people that are chemists that work for our company, particularly in our R&D department, is made up of people with that chemistry background that are really experts in making sure that we are getting our crystals to form correctly and with the things that we want in them and keeping the other stuff out. And we do make some different types of salts as well. So there's your common sodium chloride salt, which is the most common type that you have. But then we also, for people that have sodium intolerances, we do also make like a potassium chloride salt as well. So you can find that on the shelves. It's under like a light salt or a salt sub is how you might find it labeled in a grocery store as well. So if you're trying to control your salt levels, we also make some other options. And then what you might not realize is we also produce some spices and seasoning blends as well. So we do have some high risk materials as well that we produce in just a handful of our salt facilities.
That is really cool. And as someone who studies fats, which they also crystallize, I also know that there's like a whole science behind crystallization, all that type of stuff. And as much as I think the science is really cool, I want to bring the conversation back to you and kind of focusing on what you do, because that's kind of why we're here. And, you've done a really good job at walking me through the quality aspects of salt and such. But I would love to know more about how you got to being in quality for salts. I saw that you were at once an engineer. Would you be able to walk me through the steps of how you got to where you are today?
Yes, I would say my background is not typical. I think most quality assurance professionals that get into the food industry. So for those that are listening, I mean, there's no right or wrong path. How you start off definitely does not dictate where you finish up in your career by any means. So yeah, my degree is in mechanical engineering with a specialization in manufacturing. I started out of college, I started working as a process engineer for 3M. So for those of you that aren't familiar with 3M, they're most famous for Scotch tape, Post-it notes, things like that. And so in there, I started getting more into like continuous improvement techniques. So I worked at a couple of those different facilities and worked within the manufacturing sites, and then that made a pivot from working in a consumer products company at 3M and moved over to Kraft Foods, where I continued working in this continuous improvement realm in our manufacturing site at Kraft Foods. And then it's kind of evolved from there, my role into the quality organization. So from working in the manufacturing site at Kraft Foods and putting in these continuous improvement projects, and opportunities opened up within our corporate offices to continue to roll these continuous improvement concepts out beyond our own manufacturing walls. So I started getting involved in supplier quality, where we're partnering with our suppliers to make sure that they're providing us with the highest quality products and reducing costs within our supply chain with our suppliers. And then it kept going further down the quality rabbit hole. From there, I moved into our that supplier quality role was within our procurement organization, which I know in college I didn't know what procurement was coming from mechanical engineering. So those are the people that are responsible for purchasing your raw materials, and equipment. So anything that you're buying, they're the buyers of the company. So then we moved it supplier quality over within our quality organ, which again was more making sure like that our suppliers are hitting the specifications that we wanted to get, so that the packaging components would run better on our equipment in our own internal facilities. And then I evolved into a role doing corrective and preventive action program management. So there was about a decade ago, there was a very massive overhaul of the legislation within the US for how the food industry regulates itself. And one of those was a stricter requirement for corrective and preventive action. So those are when something goes wrong in your facility, it's making sure that you're putting in effective steps to mitigate that problem from happening again in the future. And so that requires a lot of documentation to support that you're doing the right thing and that you've evaluated the risk and put in the proper steps to control there. So I managed a pretty significantly sized team that was managing all of these corrective and preventive action bosses at the company at Kraft Foods. Then I went over to PepsiCo for a few years. And again, with this legislation that was rolling out, it's called the Food Safety Modernization Act. And Canada just recently launched the Safe Foods for Canadians Act, which is very similar to the US legislation as well. And similarly to like the corrective action programs, this new legislation is making sure that the documentation and due diligence that you're doing on your suppliers was held to a higher caliber than it was previous to that. Those regulations going into effect. So at PepsiCo, I worked with and managed a team to work with, I think, the thousands of suppliers that we have. PepsiCo, as you can imagine, is a giant company and have a very large supply chain there to make sure that we had all of the documentation to support our usage of suppliers was in order. And then I went from there over to Morton Salt and started developing what the supply chain program would look for Morton Salt. And now it brings me today where I'm now managing the team of employees that help me out with managing the risk within our supply chain.
Wow, that is really interesting. So coming, like I said, coming from that engineering background to this, but I think it just highlights as well how much there is going on in the background of keeping food and just general products safe that as maybe the average consumer might not realize is behind there and how much things are trying to take place and are continuously evolving to again keep people safe. There's a lot of roles out there, I think, that could fulfill them, and people just don't know they exist.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think like probably most people, when they think about like quality assurance within the food industry, are thinking of like the lab professionals or the quality manager at the manufacturing site itself. And they certainly play a critical role, right, of keeping food safe and making sure that the things are done day to day to produce that food. But, there are lots of hazards that can occur, like when you're transporting food as well. So, like making sure that seals have been placed on trucks so that there's nobody that's tampering with the safe product that's been put in place. On the supplier side, it's making sure, let's take like a micro hazard, for example. My favorite one is peanuts to use. And there, like
Mhm.
salmonella is a good risk within raw peanuts. And so like your supplier quality program is making sure that there's a clear understanding of who's controlling that salmonella hazard. Is it the supplier or is it our own internal site? And if it's the supplier, making sure that we're validating that they're doing the proper pathogen reduction steps so that when we take it in, we have the right information on our certificate of analysis and that our plants feel confident that our suppliers put in the correct steps to mitigate the hazard so that we can use it without having to put our own kill step in on that peanut. And then all the way up to the customer as well. So then we have like storage and distribution after we've made the product. And so it's making sure that our warehouses are storing our food in safe manner so that they're not storing it next to hazardous material, that they have pest control programs in place at our warehouses. And then, as much as you hope that you did everything right when you made that product, inevitably there's still some hiccups along the way. And my team gets to interact with our customers. So salt is an ingredient in almost everything that we eat. So we sell salt to essentially pretty much every manufacturer that's out there. And, we have to help them to make sure that we're either providing them the right product or respond to the quality issues they might be having when they receive that material when there has been some hiccup within the supply chain to get them less than perfect materials.
Yeah, and what I'm thinking about as well is that handoff of ingredients, like you were just mentioning that where does the line go between it becomes not saying problem because that's not the word I want to use, but just like that handoff of ingredients as it follows through the supply chain, who is supposed to take responsibility if something were to come wrong, or who is ensuring that transportation in the in between steps? And I guess working in the preventative action and in the supply chain, like that's your goal is to make sure that those in between steps.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'm involved with, which I think probably people would never think that this is even a job coming out of college, but one of the aspects of my role is, as you talked about, making sure that people know what they're accountable for. And that goes all the way into our contracts that we have with our third parties, with our suppliers and our customers to make sure that we're outlining exactly what people are expected to do, what our interaction is in between each other on communication, and really like where did that ownership start and stop between those parties and the hands off. So I'm pretty involved when we do any new business partnership. I will review the contracts to make sure that our quality terms are all outlined and that everybody's on board with an understanding of how we're going to operate. And then also, this is where I don't know that I touched on this yet, but I also oversee a quality auditing team. So that audits both our internal sites to make sure that we're following our own policies and procedures, but then also we're talking about our contract manufacturers or our suppliers or third party warehouses, that they are also putting in their same similar programs and procedures to make sure that they're meeting our quality terms and expectations as well.
Okay. And I'm just trying to visualize this from just an outsider's perspective of how this looks, because this sounds like there is a lot of, eventually it could start to look like data. But I guess I'm just trying to say, like, how do you organize or how do you keep track of so many different sites? Like, is there software programs that help? I guess you have a team that helps, but could you just maybe talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, there definitely are. So there are a lot of for like supplier quality management, there's a couple options on how you keep track of like the number of suppliers. So for smaller companies or medium to smaller size-ish companies like at Morton Salt, we do a lot of it in just like homegrown programs that we've developed because it's not an outrageous number of suppliers to manage. So we can manage it through spreadsheets and like we use Microsoft Teams, so they have like some databases as well as some more formal like quality management systems where we can store our documents to keep everything filed. The larger companies that I've worked with, they have more commercially available supplier quality management tools where they can tie they're very cool. They have the ability to like take the raw material that you're producing, so your finished product that you're producing, tie it to all the raw materials that went in there, tie that to all the specifications, tie to that raw material so that you can make sure that everything is connected to each other and you know exactly what's being used for to make what product and exactly where it's coming from within the supply chain of who's making it as well. So they definitely have tools out there to help larger size. I mean, they're helpful for small companies as
Mhm.
well, but definitely are essential when you get into these organizations where you have thousands of suppliers. Like it's really cumbersome to deal with on an Excel spreadsheet,
I could imagine
for
it.
example.
Yeah, I could imagine, like, I don't e yeah, I don't even you know what? I can imagine and I don't even want with how much complicated something like that is, but and it makes me wonder, like, what kept you going into quality and, like, what do you enjoy about your job now that's made you stay in this area?
Yeah, I think it was I got my foot into quality really working with our suppliers, and I think what was exciting about that is just the portions of the organization that you get exposed to. So when I was in our plants, like obviously there's a strong operations presence and you're working with the operations team that are running the plant. Within the supplier quality realm, though, I really get pulled into a lot of different departments to help them meet their goals. So it could be with our marketing and brand team when they're wanting to launch a new product. I'm able to help support them and evaluate the raw materials that are going in there to make sure that we are evaluating our products and that they're going to meet our consumer needs when we launch them. I, I work very closely with our sales team. So when we're supporting our customers, I get to interact with our customer side. I get to work with our procurement team and help them meet their cost savings goals for the organization. So, you know, work with them to innovate ways that we can do things either more efficiently with our suppliers or go for lower cost raw materials while we're still meeting the quality standards as well. So I really get to play with a lot of different projects that are happening simultaneously. A lot of it's juggling a lot of balls all at once, but I think that's what makes the job challenging, but also makes it a lot of fun to come into work every day.
That's so cool, and that's something I would have never thought about, to be honest with you. I would think about it again being in front of the data, kind of going through that because I've heard that if someone wants to kind of be in that communication role, they would go into account management because they're kind of that department that works with everyone. But it seems like if you're someone who's interested in quality in that, but maybe you're not wanting to stick it out in the lab, but because a lot of people say they move away from lab roles because it can be a little lonely or that's not their place. But it seems like there's other places in that quality kind of realm that if you want to be more of a communication person talking around, but still have those technical skills, that's you could build something in this kind of area of expertise.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's what has made me, again, like I started, I don't have the micro background, I don't have the chemistry background, the food science background, nothing that most people like those I'd say are
Mhm.
top hitters for what are in my peers' resumes there. But I think how I've gotten where I am is picking up a tool set along the way and figuring out how I can apply it to the new situation that I've thrown in. So I'm definitely somebody that is, with my engineering background, is very much into problem solving,
Mhm.
risk assessment, and that's what you do in engineering. And it's the same thing, just applied in a different way when you're talking about quality management as well.
That is the perfect timing to ask for one of the questions, and I think you already know what I'm going to ask you, but I wanted to know what are you actually working on actively right now, or if there is any like skills or training, because we always want to keep learning in our careers. So I was curious about that.
Yeah, so I think right now the biggest thing that I'm learning is we recently went through like a reorganization structure of our team. So I picked up our internal audit, I picked up our auditing program, which was not something that I had done before. So I'm not a trained auditor by any means, but now I'm responsible for leading our team that's doing auditing. So right now I'm working on learning more about what makes an effective, well, I've been exposed to audits a lot of the time. I've never been
Mhm.
the one responsible for doing that, but now I'm responsible for coaching and evaluating our audit team. So I need to learn more essentially about how to be a good auditor. So currently, right now, I'm halfway through my internal auditor training program right now, but that's one of the examples. And then really diving more into some other areas that I was already generally exposed to, but need to know more, which would be around like I don't know if you're aware, but the Global Food Safety Initiative audit
Yeah.
schemes. So they're commonly referred to as GFSI. So learning more about those requirements, learning more about figuring out what is the best fit for us as an organization. So those are some things that I'm currently still learning, as well as we recently had the company merger. We got bought out by a different parent company. So learning how they did things differently than how we've done things in the past and how we're going to move forward together in the best way. So it's always changing, always learning some new things. And whenever we have a customer hiccup as well, it's always a new learning for opportunities to learn more about where our products are going and learn about our customers' processes as well.
That's really cool. I've had a brush myself with learning about auditor training, and it's really interesting how these different programs have it set up and just how much more it really draws your attention to things that you might have never noticed before, but just getting that exposure. If someone wants to be an auditor, they definitely have that eye for detail and just really honing in on things.
This is true. It is definitely not a career for everybody. I think the things a good auditor is exactly what you hit on. People that really like to dig into processes, dig into paperwork, and it's kind of being a detective. Not that you're trying to like be a gotcha person or anything,
Yeah.
but it's kind of people that like to go in. It's definitely, I think, one of the good things about our audit program is you get to go a lot of different geographic areas. So if you're a person that likes to travel a lot, I think that's a good opportunity to take you to different places where you may not have gone prior. Same thing with supplier quality as well. I know that it's taken me to some very interesting places around the globe that I know that I would never have gone on my own as just independent traveler as well. So I think like there's definitely unique things that, don't limit yourself just to what you're interested in academically. Think about what are your passions outside of work too, and is there a way that you can incorporate them into your career? And I think auditing is a great example. If you love to travel, this is a role that's going to lend yourself to doing that as well, where you get to go explore new places, go see new things while you're doing your job.
That's a really good point, and I've also heard that as well, and I know that they're also actively looking for a lot of auditors right now because traveling's not for everyone, but and it would
Mhm.
expose you to so many different people and, like, how inherently different places, seemingly are supposed to be doing the same thing, but they have their different ways of doing it, and just you would really globally start to just get accustomed to all these new experiences. But I like you saying it's a detective thing because that is a fun way of looking at it because it is.
Yeah, right. And like ultimately, I'm gonna give auditors like a bad rap because I think
Yes.
sometimes they do of like they're not here to be the police, right? Like we always say the point of the audit is to learn and do better versus a gotcha.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that because I know when I was working in quality and it was my first time going through an audit, it is the people like for someone who's brand new to this experience, it's like, oh my God, like you're worried that they're trying to like get you, but they're not. They're there to help support you do better and ultimately just ensure that people are safe. Like that is the point of the job.
It is exactly. It's definitely an interesting role, and I have some really good long-term auditors that are on my team that are teaching me as well as I help coach them. So
Ah, that's always good to have really good support and have multiple of them, so that's even better. So we've been talking as well about that skill, and I couldn't not ask you about this because I have written about this and I have not fully understood what the heck I'm talking about. But one of the things that I noticed is that you have an L6S black belt, and I know that has to do with continuous improvement. But then after that, I have no clue. Would you be able to explain to me a little bit more what that actually is?
happy to do it. So L success, which in black belt, you're like, what is this like some martial arts thing? I know
Yeah.
I came across this in my internship the first time, and I was like, what are these people? These engineers calling themselves black belts. It seems
Yes.
very odd. Yeah. So L6S stands for Lean Six Sigma, and they're really like it's really a set of to describe it best, a set of tools and a way of assessing problems to make sure that you're delivering consistent products in the most efficient way that you can do. So, when you talk about lean, it's really like looking at your flow of goods and making sure that you're taking out one of the terms that you'll hear the most, like when you're talking about lean, is like non value added activities. So, whether like you're touching something multiple times where you could have done it just touching it once, or you're doing something that doesn't need to be done at all, or you're moving something across your factory floor and it's taking you 10 steps when if you just put it here, it would take you five and you could do it in half the amount of time. So that's really what like the lean portion is looking at is how can you make your process as short as possible? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
Okay. And then when you talk about Six Sigma, it's more looking at the product specifically and how can you make it as consistent as possible. So you're going to try to drive out the variation in your processes so that you're, like the out of spec products, you're reducing the amount that are going on there. So if you think about like Six Sigma in its like purest term, it's really a statistical term. So if you're thinking about like those bell-shaped curves and a sigma is one standard deviation going out, you're trying to reduce the amount where your products are falling within there so that you can get six standard deviations between where you're producing and where the specification is. If that makes sense, it's very stat heavy. Stat nerds get all
You know,
all dead,
you
all in Six Sigma. So
okay, to be honest, I'm happy you gave me that little nerdy type because now it makes total sense to me because now I actually understand what the heck the sigma's coming from. I don't know why I was thinking it's like some like Greek in the sense of different college houses have like they
yeah, you're like, what is this with like? And then like the belting program is just a different indication of your mastery of those tools. So somebody is starting out is going to get like a general awareness. I think some companies go on like a yellow or a white belt there. Once you're capable of like leading your own projects, they'll become a green belt. A black belt is typically expected to be able to coach and mentor, sponsor projects of green belts, take on larger scale projects. And then you get the next and final level is called a master black belt. And they're really typically working at like an enterprise level, so like the corporate level of looking at larger scale projects where green belt and black belt projects would support that.
okay, this makes a lot more sense. And I realize that it's kind of this weird jumble of weird ways of explaining. At the end of the day, the principle makes total sense. I don't really know why they've chosen all these very random things to put together, but that makes a lot more sense. Okay.
Yeah. So, and there's some other terms that you'll hear out there as well in like the continuous improvement realm. Like they'll have like TPM, which is total productivity management. There are different spins on how you want to approach problems. But like the takeaway is it's essentially like a set of tools to make things consistently and efficiently as possible. And a lot of them are very heavy on the statistics side of thing and data analysis.
Okay. How did you become aware of this? And how important would it be for someone who wants to go into continuous improvement that they get it? I guess I'm just thinking from a student's perspective, if they should try to pick this up or get the certification.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And different companies, again, have these different programs that they put in place. I would say Lean Six Sigma is one of the predominant, most popular versions of this. I think like from an entry level standpoint, I think as long as you can demonstrate like that you're interested in it, I don't know that like I didn't have one when I came in and I got hired into a role that this was something that they taught me on the job. And you can take courses as a university student that you could learn the statistics side of it. I think like it gets a little challenging because a lot of them to get your official certificate, you have to apply it to something as well. So I think if you have an internship opportunity, this is a great time to go after that because you could take your learning of how you are applying the classroom setting of learning how you can apply those tools and then demonstrating it through it through a project and showing that you know how to apply those tools and you can apply your project management skill set as well that would allow you to get that. And if that's something that is of interest to you as a first step in your career, like you can absolutely talk to whoever you're doing your internship or co-op with and see if that's something that they would support that training for you. And there's a lot of like ASQ, it's the Association of Quality Professionals. I'm sure that's not, sorry, ASQ, that's not what your acronym is, but they offer a lot of those trainings for out there as do a lot of university courses will offer this as an e-learning module. So if your university doesn't offer it, there are typically ones that you can just pay out of pocket on the side to get this certification as well.
Okay, well, I'll make sure to share the proper whatever acronym in the show notes. So if anyone wants to find that, I'll help
I
them
want to
out
say maybe
there.
it's like American Society of Quality. That's probably wrong as well. So I'm not positive what sorry.
I think we'll be able I think we'll be able to find it. I mean, I can't see there being too many quality American, all that type of stuff, but I'll get you in the show notes. So,
Excellent, excellent.
and that already and that already answered my question about some associations or groups that are in the field. We are coming down to the end of this, and I don't want to pass up the chance to ask you, what advice would you give to students looking to go into a career that's similar to yours, or even just life advice in general?
Yeah, I know you sent me the questions before and I was thinking about this one. And I think when I look back at like my career path and how I got here, I was always one of those people that when people ask like, what do you want to do 5 years from now? I typically have no vision of like where I want to go. I have like narrow out the things that I don't want to do. Like I go into positions and I say, this for sure is not something that I want to do again. I tried it out and this isn't. So I think like some of my advice that I would give, pay attention to the things when you're deciding on your career path of the types of things that excite you, the types of things that you like to work on, as well as the stuff that you know is going to be a mental drag, an energy drag that just doesn't get you out of bed in the morning to get you excited to come into work. And, be open to where those interests may take you in your career. So I think like starting out as a mechanical engineer, I think leading a quality assurance group at a food company is not at all where I saw myself going a couple of decades ago here. It definitely wasn't what I out of high school. Somebody said, what did you want to do? It was not this. It would not have been quality. I think even in my first job, I saw our quality manager was like, well, that seems horrible. And then here I am and I love where I'm doing stuff now. So I would say like just advice, like it's always good to have like where you want to take your career, but be open to saying yes to things that take you outside of your comfort zone. As long as they're checking the boxes of where you're passionate about the culture that you want to work in and that you're learning something new and it's challenging and you might be surprised where it may take you to roles that you wouldn't have considered prior to that. And I think for students, the other advice that I would give as you're looking to get into the food industry don't get discouraged if your first job isn't in the food industry as well. There's a lot of complementary industries where you can acquire those skill sets and hone them so that you are marketable to when you're ready to make the next step in your career to enter into the food industry. So it's varied. There's lots of different career paths in there because essentially the food industry is a manufacturing facility. So skills that you can learn at a company that's manufacturing other things are going to be applicable once you can transition into food as well.
I've not come across that advice yet because everyone always says just get your foot in the door, but you're saying get your foot in the door within another industry because now that I think about it, yeah, your career path, you kind of transition from you did not start in food, but those principles still applied to different ones. So I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if your goal is being a food scientist and like food developer, that might be more challenging to find something that's complementary.
Mhm.
But again, if you're listening to this and you're an engineer or a chemist, like there are other companies where you can home like and say like, hey, look, I've got real world experience working in a lab. I've got experience working on a manufacturing floor. I have enough background now that I can transition this over and pick up the food portion in the next job as well. I would just say don't get discouraged if that first job isn't in the food industry. Probably going to be a path that'll get you there sooner rather than later if that's ultimately where you want to end up.
Well, I'm going to leave that there because that is some great advice for everyone to let it sink in. And before I let you go, I need to ask you where, if people want to find you, where can we find you?
The easiest place would be LinkedIn, probably.
Okay, I'll make sure to link that in the show notes. So, once again, thank you so much, Jill, for coming on the show. I have learned a lot more about salt, and I'm very pleased with my knowledge now. And just to know that there's, again, more career options out there that I just never thought of.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me on, Martha. It was fun talking with you.
That was episode 38 of the FoodGrads Podcast. All the notes to this podcast can be found on the FoodGrads homepage by clicking on the Student and Grads tab there. There, you can find any notes to past or future episodes. Do you know anyone you would like me to interview on the show? Perhaps yourself? Or maybe a specific career path you would like me to explore? Then reach out and let me know. You can contact me at veronica@foodgrads.com or any of the FoodGrads social media channels. Hope to hear from you. That was a great episode. When writing the FoodGrads career guide, I knew generally what continuous improvement was, but nothing really in depth. So I really appreciated Jill filling up these gaps that I've had because it just makes me realize how important of a career it is and just so many places that you could really take it and come from your different like backgrounds or jobs or all that type of stuff. So it was really cool to learn about that. And not only that, just thinking about how cool it is about where salt comes from. We take it for granted because of how readily available it is, but we should take some time to really think about it because it's pretty amazing. And not only that, it's a product that has to go through the supply chain just like any other, and quality and safety have to be ensured for consumers. It's good to know that there are people out there like Jill helping to keep our food chain safe, even if we don't even realize that it's happening. So there you go, a potential future career path for those that are interested in food safety. So maybe consider it. Anyways, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and I will see you next time.